The great disillusionment, when the veil falls away. In the aftermath of spiritual awakening, the soul finds itself suspended between two worlds, the familiar realm of desires and ambitions now rendered hollow, and the vast expanse of consciousness that defies all previous understanding. Carl Jung recognized this liminal space as the inevitable consequence of encountering the self, that archetypal wholeness which renders the ego's former pursuits pale and meaningless. The very motivation that once drove us through life's maze suddenly evaporates, leaving us like travelers who have reached the summit only to discover that the journey itself was the destination. This is not failure but transformation, not emptiness but the profound fullness that masquerades as void. The collapse of the heroic ideal. Jung understood that human development follows the archetypal pattern of the hero's journey, where the ego must conquer, achieve, and accumulate to establish its identity. Yet awakening reveals this heroic narrative as a necessary illusion, a scaffolding that must eventually be dismantled. The motivation that once burned bright, career advancement, material success, social recognition, appears suddenly as shadow play upon the wall of consciousness. The awakened individual stands before the ruins of their former self, not in defeat but in recognition that the very need to strive, to become, to achieve was always a substitute for simply being. This collapse is not pathological but evolutionary, marking the transition from the first half of life's external focus to the second half's inner integration. The paradox of fulfilled emptiness. What Jung called the transcendent function operates through paradox, and nowhere is this more evident than in the apparent motivational void that follows spiritual awakening. The ego, accustomed to operating through want and lack, finds itself in a state of fundamental completeness that renders desire obsolete. This is not the emptiness of depression but the pregnant void of potential, the fertile darkness from which all creation springs. The awakened consciousness dwells in what mystics have long recognized as the eternal present, where the very concept of striving toward a future goal becomes as meaningless as grasping at clouds. In this state, action may still occur, but it arises spontaneously from being rather than compulsively from wanting. The individuation crisis, beyond personal will. Jung's concept of individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious with consciousness, inevitably leads to a crisis of personal will. The awakened individual discovers that the separate self, with its arsenal of motivations and desires, was always a construction, a necessary stage in development but not the final destination. The personal will, which once seemed the engine of all achievement, reveals itself as a tributary flowing into the vast ocean of universal consciousness. This recognition can paralyze the ego, which knows no other way to operate than through the mechanism of want and effort. Yet this apparent paralysis is actually a gestation period, a necessary pause before a new way of being can emerge, one that operates through surrender rather than force, through alignment rather than struggle. The birth of authentic action. From the ashes of ego-driven motivation arises something far more profound, authentic action that springs from the depths of being rather than the surface of wanting. Jung observed that true individuation leads not to passivity but to a new kind of engagement with life, one that is choiceless, effortless, and infinitely more effective than the old paradigm of struggle and achievement. This is the action of the sage, the artist, the mystic, those who have passed through the eye of the needle and emerged on the other side of striving. Their motivation is no longer personal but universal, no longer driven by lack but by abundance, no longer seeking to fill an inner void but expressing an inner fullness. In this state, life itself becomes both the path and the destination, the question and the answer, the seeker and the sought. Dear seekers, if this truth resonates with you, if you've felt the stillness after awakening and long for the spark to return, know this: you are not lost, only in sacred transition. The dawn always follows the night. If this journey speaks to your soul, share your thoughts below. Where are you in your awakening? Let's unfold this wisdom together. Subscribe for deeper explorations, because the path back to purpose begins with a single step.